Well, it sounds like it requires strategic alignment with doing this, and then there's a decision that has to get made. Maybe it's in reaction to something going really wrong. Hopefully, it's proactive, but look, it might not always be.
Yeah, but I think that eventually what you're saying is that the main decision here is that you're going to invest time, resources into creating that option plan, okay, for that rainy day. How, in such an accuracy obsessed environment, do you change to the shift that I have a range of possibilities in the future, and I have to prepare an option plan? It doesn't mean that I invest the money today. But I do need to discuss it. So how do you do that shift in mindset to make such a decision? It's not only a manager decision. Now I'm going to invest $5 million in options. As we see in the market, we have to propagate that to the local decision makers that actually create these options.
Yeah, but I think it has to start from the leadership. Right? So I'll give an example. One of the exercises we're doing with firms many times is scenario planning. And scenario planning brings people from different layers of the organization, but primarily it's trying to say it's not forecasting is not forecasting. Forecasting is part of a strategic planning tool. We're not doing strategy in isolation from trying to anticipate the future. The anticipation of the future is part of strategy, and strategy is part of that. But then once you get into that habit, now you get into the exercise of trying to understand how do I actually boil it down to decision making. Now, I would say the people at a, I wouldn't say the people at the bottom, but the people that actually are closest to decision making, usually they're the ones that understand the trade-offs. They understand exactly these trade-offs and say, well, sure, I can better model that. But the better I forecast that, potentially there is a risk of the forecast being less robust. Or sure, I can actually have an amazing plan, but the more optimized the plan is, most likely it's also not robust. And so here I think I go back to the leadership point, because if the leader is actually, the leaders many times, and I'm now sort of like, collapsing the organization into sort of like two layers, like certainty, because the market likes certainty. Leaders like to come
Mm.
and have in their guidelines, in their guidance on earning calls, to say we're going to grow by 12%. Even though everybody knows that, how can they forecast that? And so, in fact, right, I mean, the market penalizes them for not meeting that. You look at, a firm like Instacart, for example, it's a firm that I follow closely. They miss revenues by 1%, their stock drops by 10%. Even though, in fact, if a firm doesn't miss their guideline ever, that would be more surprising to me than actually making it every single time. So the market trained leaders to try to look for certainty, and they are the one that drop it below to the people who run it, because they say, I want to know the cost. I want to know the revenue. I want to have, and they even like more control. So I would usually blame leadership more than supply chain people. When I speak with supply chain people, they're not delusional. It's the C-suite that are delusional about how supply chain are run and the trade-offs they need to make.
But don't you see, like, also the supply chain people still trying to stick to a perfect plan or to a one number plan versus really looking at different options?
I think that's because of years and years of education and years and years of inertia, right? I mean, I think all of us like to wake up in the morning and know exactly what route we're going to take to the office. And we like to know what hour we pick our kids. You don't want, I'm sure, to get a call from your kids to a teacher say, oh, today the kids are already exhausted. They've studied so much. You can come and pick them up at 10 a.m. It's already great. The day is being amazing. And you don't want to hear also, they're really working not such so great today. 8:30 is the time to pick them up. Right? None of us, all of us like certainty. I mean, it's like, and so, but at the same time, right? I mean, I think to your point, right? I mean, like your kids are probably not experiencing the uncertainty of, the school teacher is now deciding that there are 100% tariffs on their learning at the same day. And so I think what supply chains are adjusting is to the fact that now we see once a week, something was supposed to be a once in a lifetime event. And so like, I don't think supply chain managers or supply chain, execs or execs in general adopted to that situation. But I would say the fact that people like to stick to a plan, this is just more like human nature than anything else. However, to your point, supply chain of the future will have to be built on these type of volatility and different plans, primarily because I think we're going to see, I think, 4 or 5 types of uncertainties of the future that are going to become more and more intense. And I think about that as geopolitical risks are going to become more intense. I mean, I think, we're only seeing, multiple wars now and present, but that's going to become even more. We are going to see a more demand risk that's impacted by social media and by announcement of different types. We're going to see more climate related uncertainties. We're already seeing that, with data centers. We're seeing it in different places, from shortages that come from heat to extreme weather. we're going to see more and more cybersecurity attacks on supply chains. And so the combination of all of that, and then of course healthcare issues, right? The pandemic we're not going to see again COVID, but we're going to see many other, health related issues. So if we think that the next 20 years we're going to see more and more of volatility around these things, the new type of supply chain will have to address the fact that these are not, I think here I like the idea that these are not black swans. These are more like white rhinos. Right? These are extreme events, but they're extreme and expected events. We just don't know the timing. Right. So, and so not knowing the timing means that we don't really know when we need to prepare for them, but we need to prepare for them. They are fairly certain to happen in our lifetime.
When you take
And
a look in the aggregate, do you think that which do you think impacts a company more? And maybe a large macroeconomic events get interpreted as small events, but do you think that the discrete macroeconomic event affects a company more than day-to-day volatility in supply chains?
Yes. And the reason for that is that the day-to-day volatility, most of that can be hedged, right? So I'll give you an example. We have now competitor introduced another product and our product went down by 5%. Or there is a warmer day. Or there is now I'm here in Philadelphia and we're just commenting that it's one of the nicest Septembers I've seen in record. The fact it's nice, means
Great.
everybody's outside. I'm sure more people drink beer. I'm sure more people drink juice and the like. That can be quite expected. Probably it's higher than what expected, but that's feasible. Now you have 100% tariffs on pharmaceuticals. That was unexpected, and that's not something a firm can hedge against. So here there are two treatments, right? So to me, at least, and that goes back maybe, Tamar, to your initial question about our supply chain healthier at this point than before. And my answer, when people ask me whether we learned anything from any of these crises, my answer is no. And the reason for that, when I speak with managers and primarily supply chain managers, it's very clear that most of them learned that whatever happened before was very structural. In which case, shortages of toilet paper, shortages of kettlebells, everything, shortages you think. And the main thing we learned that there is a very difficult shock. Most likely we're not prepared, and most likely the competition is not going to be prepared, in which case we just, raise our hands and say, what could we have done? And basically everybody shifted to primarily praying rather than preparing, because the day-to-day is actually very much pressure on margin. And so if I go back, Jameson, to your question, I think over the next few years, supply chains will be able to use all the data that they aggregated. If they will be used to actually try to build a system that's much more robust to these extreme long-tail events, that will be a massive advantage. Because if now all the shelves are empty from the competitors and you're the one putting the things on the shelf, if you actually are the ones that are able to identify which supplier is going to go bankrupt before everybody else and actually hedge against that, it's not can I manage 5% better inventory, but can I actually have these extreme events under control? That's going to be a massive advantage, primarily in a world that's going to be much more volatile than what we've seen from the 90s all the way to 2020.
So first of all, you can't really model this in a spreadsheet, right?
Right.
So there is a shift that we may wonder. Isn't it also a lot about your reaction time and decisions? Because a lot of times you can make a great decision, but it just takes time with all the people who are in the room. So what about like the cadence of decision making that has to change in order to really grasp these opportunities, right? This is like the definition of anti-fragility, right? Winning from disruptions is exactly getting the market share. Competitor also goes down. So how would you change decision making and the cadence of decision making to really react fast and grasp these opportunities? It's not just foreseeing the future.
No, but it's a great question, because I think, to me at least, I usually think about it as a multi-step solution when I think about these extreme events. And here I'm not talking about just like demand went up by 5%. I'm talking about or we missed forecast by 5%. I'm talking about somewhat of an extreme event. And I think about that, most firms have teams that are ready for that, right? The moment that happens, they go and the first thing they do is they try to do damage control or estimation, what really went wrong. We have shortages here. We have excess inventory here. We have a plant now in Thailand that is underwater, whatever it is. And then the next step is they try to find solutions, right? They try to see, can we use a different raw material? Can we use a different supplier? Can we ship things from a different place? But to me, at least, to be able to get to the speed that you're talking about, you need to start much earlier. You need to have an ongoing cadence where you're saying, hey, where are we? Where are we? And that requires mapping, that requires hedging, that requires mitigation. And these can be done in multiple different ways. It might be that you realize that your supply chain is fragile to a specific shortage of a specific supplier. That's not your key supplier, but in every product that you have this like 1% of that ingredient, and that's the only supplier you manage to qualify for that. And big firms, primarily if they look for global suppliers, many times they have one supplier for a specific topic, primarily if these are ingredients that are, let's say, related to food, for example, then you need something that is kosher and halal and vegan, and there's one supplier in the world that can do it. It's really, really small, but anyway, so you need to have the ability to map, think about mitigation, estimate mitigation, and this has to be on an ongoing basis, right? So when actually something happened, you can actually say, well, we know what's the plan. The plan is to do supplier A, B, we're replacing this with that product. We're now deprioritizing this product because we don't have enough raw material and we need to take it there. But now it's not an extreme event anymore. But the key element is that I think that cadence of decisions has to be made where you're collecting information on an ongoing basis. So there is a strategic aspect of it, there is a tactical aspect of it, but then there is executional. The execution, you can leave it when it actually happens, but the strategic and the tactical have to be happening on an ongoing basis.
But you need some guardrails for the execution, right? I mean, you can't have all that discussion while it's happening.
Right, but that's the point of, like, if you know now, like imagine you know who are your revenue at risk. So, or you have a very good mapping of your suppliers. Then you say, as long as we are within these bands, we don't really need to make a decision. We just execute the current plan, and the current plan is to carry 14 days of raw material from that product. We have 10 days of that. But now when we actually start realizing we have only 5 days of that, we have only 2 days of that, then we need now to make a decision. Then now we need to start reacting. Or now we get information that there is floods in Thailand. Now there is an earthquake in Japan. Now there is significant outage somewhere in China where our key suppliers are. Now we know this is an extreme event, and now we have plans for what happened outside.